Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in the spirit of bipartisanship, let me say I agree that HR-1 should be divided into its component parts, because perhaps it could be argued that there's some worthwhile legislation written in here. But as a totality of circumstance, one word describes this thing: wrong. Just wrong. This bill is exactly reflective of why our founding fathers passionately debated after the Revolutionary War, prior to the formation of our Federalist Society and central government. They passionately debated whether or not this thing could even work, if we could have a Federalist Society and a union of states with a strong central government and still maintain individual rights and freedoms. My colleague across the aisle mentioned Russia. Russia's been mentioned several times today. This bill resembles Russian government policy. Most of us here have taken an oath before we became congressmen and congresswomen. I took an oath as an Army soldier. I took oaths as a police officer, a sheriff's deputy. You panelists before us are courageous to come before this committee, where many very serious decisions will be made. Debates shall be engaged. But most of you have taken an oath as well. And may I say that the oaths that I took in my life were not to a company commander or a general or a sheriff or a chief or a marshal. They were to the constitutionalist principles that my oath represented. Mr. Smith, does our First Amendment protect freedom of speech?
I think that goes without saying.
Does HR-1 abridge the freedom of speech?
Pardon? Pardon, I didn't hear that.
Would you agree that HR-1 abridges the freedom
yes.
of speech?
Yes.
Absolutely. Gives almost total partisan government control over the freedom of political speech in a representative republic where these freedoms have been paid for by the blood of patriots past. Are we worthy to be the Americans that occupy this body? Did our founders intend, Mr. Smith, for there to be an expiration date on our First Amendment rights? Any panelist?
No.
Of course not. That expiration date will come if HR-1 passes. Mr. Smith, I'd like to ask you, according to the tone that my colleagues have expressed here, Americans watching this would think that they stand for the abolishment of big money in political campaigns. According to my research, the Association of Trial Lawyers gave Democrat candidates in 2018 $2.2 million, while they gave Republican candidates about $130,000. This is not a bill of the people, by the people, and for the people. It's a bill of trial lawyers, for trial lawyers, and by trial lawyers. It greatly restricts the freedoms of speech of Americans assembled as nonprofit organizations or individual citizens. It hides behind titles that are quite misleading in an era when we know that many Americans that have the right to vote, yes, but don't get past headlines. I'd like to specifically ask, in my time remaining, Mr. Smith, for you to address. Explain to us all, please, what coordinated spenders are. This is quite troubling to me. I've read your testimony and those of your colleagues, the panelists. Incorporated nonprofits defined as coordinated speakers would be banned from spending money on speech. This is directly contrary to judicial decisions passed. Please, remainder of my time, 40 seconds, explain to America what that is.
In my prepared remarks, I have a number of examples, and the way this works is, of course, most groups that people belong to, the ACLU, the NRA, Right to Life, Planned Parenthood, the NAACP, are incorporated, and if corporations can't make any coordinated expenditures because those are treated as contributions. And so just to give some examples, if a member were to purchase a ticket to a fundraiser for one of these organizations for $100 or $150, And 5 years later, that member declared his candidacy for the Senate. That organization could not make any expenditures, not only directly advocating his election defeat, but even talking about the candidate in ways that might be deemed by someone to be.
In my remaining 5 seconds, yes or no, would this have a chilling effect
You bet.
on the freedom of speech of Americans assembled from sea to shining sea?
Absolutely.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Thank you for taking your allotted time. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. This is a fascinating conversation. I want to thank Mr. Sarbanes for his